This video is brought to you by Patreon supporter Scott. Well, hello and welcome. You find yourself checking out the SIG Tango4 1-4x24 with the 556-762 Horseshoe illuminated reticle in first focal plane form. That was a mouthful. And before we get into anything else, I have to stress that this thing is so close to perfect that it actually bothers me. What's wrong with it is not the fact that the reticle is so small at 1x, it's the fact that the illumination is so dim. When we zoom it up to 4x here, you can see the reticle becomes a very usable size. Almost perfect, in fact. But here's the thing. That's as bright as the illumination gets. And at 1x, full brightness illumination, there it is. You can barely see that it's there. The keen viewer might have noticed that from 1 to 4x, the eyebox shifted slightly, but we'll touch on that very soon. You see, there it is at 1 going up to 4x. Illumination just isn't bright enough. At 1x, it's so small and so dim, you lose it on almost every surface and every background. And that's it. That's the biggest thing with this scope. The illumination just isn't there. If this is as bright as a P4XI, a PST Gen 2, or a Razer HD Gen 2 1-6, it would be sensational. Unfortunately, it's just not there. Enough bad talk. Let's talk about something good. The turrets and tracking. SIG Tango4 1-4. We are as zeroed as I think we're going to get for right now. Let's put the illumination to maximum, which is just doable. And let's give this windage a twirl. So we are at 16. That is a lot of windage adjustment. More than anything I think most people would ever need. Yep. I love the controls on this thing. Turrets are basically target turrets with how they feel. They're freaking awesome. And windage resets to 0 basically perfectly. And we are at 25.5 on our elevation. Let's go down, which is technically up. Massive amounts of adjustment. And it lines up pretty good, even though I had to line this up by eye. Wow, this thing has stupid amounts of adjustment to it. And it was 25 and the click, and that is our 0, folks. This thing tracks basically as perfect as anyone could expect or hope for. You've already heard that word used several times in this video. Perfect. And this thing really does come close to it. Alright, moving to our 30-yard power transformer at 1x. Maximum illumination here is at 8, and you can see it's just not daytime bright. It's not a matter of the reticle being really small, it's a matter of the illumination not being daytime bright. It's good for larger magnification scopes like 5 to 25s, where it doesn't really matter. So we briefly touched on this earlier. When we shift it from 1 to about 1.25x, you're going to see the eyebox change a little bit, the view through the scope. Now the reason for this is at 4x, it gets a little bit tight. So where we are currently is when we're looking through it at 4x, like right now, everything's perfect, but 1x is really open. I'm going to illustrate the differences soon, but to the naked eye, it's not that bad. So despite the fact that we're at 4x and we're looking at a 30-yard power transformer, the image is still quite sharp and clear. Granted, it does get a little soft and blurry at the outside edge, but keep in mind this is a non-parallax adjustable scope. I believe this is set to about 100 yards, so anything inside that being as clear as it is right now is quite impressive. It's another reason why I like the 1 to 4x magnification range of most LPVOs. A good 1x and a really good 4x trumps, in my opinion, a decent 1x and a decent 6x. I'm looking for the clarity and resolution. And here at 400 yards, you can see a lot of fine details towards the center of that image. Again, the outside edge is a little on the soft side, but it's really not that bad. The center, though, you can count those bricks at 4x at 400 yards. That's really quite impressive no matter how you look at it. And in my opinion, that's more important than having more magnification with less sharpness, clarity, or resolution. Also, brightness transmission coming through the scope is excellent. Looking through this Tango4 is at least as bright as it is with the naked eye. Those power towers off in the distance are roughly 800 yards away, and again, you can really see a lot of fine detail there. You can even make out the larger branches in that big mangled mess of dead trees. Now, we're going to talk more about the eyebox a little bit later, but I wanted to showcase how far off to the side you can be behind the scope at 1x and have it still be usable. It's a lot, really. The eyebox on this thing is stellar, and it just adds to this thing being really close to perfect.
Still touching on the large eyebox at 1x, I have shifted this forward on the rail by 2 pick slots, and you can clearly see that it's not only farther away, but you can see a lot less of the scope body. I could have probably easily slid this up another slot or two on the pick rail and still be able to use it at 1x. But when we move the magnification up to about 4x, you can see you can't really use it.
1x is extremely forgiving. Night vision 1, night vision 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, maximum brightness.
Now, yeah, the maximum illumination right now looks really damn good and usable, but it's a very dark environment. The second we go into a brighter environment, it completely washes out, and it just goes back to the only flaw, in my opinion, this scope has, and that is really poor illumination. In all seriousness, all SIG needed to do to make this scope really, really awesome was just increase the brightness of the illumination. And that's the same thing I've been harping on this entire video.
Pew pew!
And yes, I'm going to keep harping on about it because SIG came so close to making a perfect little 1:4 FFP LPVO package, and they stumbled at the finish line.
Dun 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 dun. Pew 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 pew. Dun 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 dun. Pew pew. Dun 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 dun. Do 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 do. Do 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 do. Hostage has been rescued. Do.
I can say that there was nothing consumed before the filming of that video that made me do that. But one thing I would like to touch on is just how good the 1x was on that. If you really pay attention, it has almost no deformation. It's got almost no magnification to it. Even right now going around this dumpster, there's a little bit of tearing, but you know what? We're within 3 feet of that thing. And to have it look as good as it does is just superb. You can also see that I moved it back into the original position, so the 4x is perfect for our setup, and you can see more of the scope body at 1x. But again, it's not terrible as is right now. When you're behind it, I promise you it isn't as bad. One thing I'm trying to do with this video is trying to incorporate a lot of the ambiance from my original videos. This way you could really focus on the scope and the environment and still do the overlays. So this way you get more information crammed in at once. I feel it's going to be a pretty good balance, and I want your opinion on if you like it or not. Now, before I talk about the backstop, just take a look at how well the pickup the brass sign looks compared to real life and through the scope. It's almost perfect, showing you just how little deformation there is. And if you're a longtime viewer of my channel with 1x LPVOs, you'll know that the backstop, the black bar right across the targets, is almost perfectly lined up. Even on some higher top tier LPVOs, there is a bit of a shift. And in this, there really doesn't seem to be all that much of a shift, just lending to how well the optics perform at 1x on this scope. Bring the magnification back up to 4x to showcase the rather nice reticle. It's not my favorite reticle, but it does manage to bring a lot of information to the table without being too cluttered or clumsy. Now, reticles are, in my opinion, a very personal preference. And for this one, for me, I really like that it brings really good drops, a really fine center dot, and that donut of death, which reminds me of the Burris RT6 reticle that I reviewed many months ago. It's a nice little package, but again, it lacks the illumination. Keep in mind, we are at maximum illumination right now, but it's also very bright and very snowy, but still we should be able to see at least a little bit more than what we currently do. Finally, I get to showcase how big the 1x is on this thing. And there you go. We are way farther behind it than we would probably ever need to be. Probably as far as you would have it mounted for a scout style rifle. And it's still usable at 1x. It's just insane how big it is. However, when we bump the magnification up to 2x like you see here, it does be normal out a little bit. It's still quite large and open and very easy to get behind. The only time we're going to have any sort of little issues is with 4x, which you're about to see right now. But even so, it's still a decent performance. It's not the best performance, but it's decent. Probably on par with how some 6x's are, but you gotta love just how big and open the 1, even 2, even 3x is on this thing. I feel the Type 4x is a good compromise for the large 1x. Let's get a little deeper and a little darker, shall we? Illumination is of course going to go on maximum and stay there. With the light in a dark environment like this, just like you saw earlier in the laundry room, the illumination's just enough to make it out, but not enough to really stand out. And when you're using this with such a tiny little dot that's so dark, it's just, it's a disappointment. Again, though, the glass looks stellar, and the throw lever on this thing that's included is basically perfect. You can't ask for much more from any sort of throw lever.
Pew pew!
Both factory and aftermarket. It's also aided by the fact that it's not a 180-degree throw like you find in most LPVOs. It's like 120, which is, quite frankly, perfect. And there it is again, perfect. SIG made this thing so close to the limit of being perfect and just, backed it out 10%. And that 10% just so happens to be the illumination brightness, like I've mentioned on infinitum throughout this entire video. And it's really bothering me, especially considering that the 6T that they sold to the military apparently has the same minor flaw, the illumination. Everything else is perfect. But before we get into my final thoughts, just enjoy this little bit of ambiance.
Pew! Pew pew! Pew pew!
Yes, this is Christmas themed, and I was hoping to get it out around Christmas, but school, work, and everything else sort of got in the way. And on that note, a little bit more ranting during my final thoughts. So this Tango4 1-4 comes in so close to being perfect, and I'm done mentioning that word. You already know everything else. I've talked about it enough. Do I recommend this? You have to know its flaw. It's one major flaw. If you can deal with that, then I would recommend it because the rest of it is just that good. But that flaw is a big one for me. If this was a second focal plane scope, it wouldn't bother me as much because then at least the reticle would be large enough that you could see it all the time and the illumination wouldn't be that much of a factor. But that's not the case. It bothers me so much more because I have this scope's bigger older brother, the Whiskey 5 1-5 that I reviewed many months ago, which I absolutely love because the illumination is just so happens to be daytime bright. It's also just the center dot, which I love on LPVOs. Maybe if SIG made the Tango4 that fine center dot be the illuminated part and not the donut, maybe illumination would be as bright as this, in which case it would be way more usable. Or if SIG wanted to go even crazier, though, this would jack the price way up. They can do what US Optics does, or at least did, and do 2 reticles. One on the second focal plane, being the illumination, just being a dot. The other one being the actual drop reticle on the first focal plane. So when you turn on the illumination, the dot doesn't change size. But when you change magnification, the rest of the reticle does. It's a really, really great idea, and I would love to see how that works in practice. In case you're wondering why my desk is a mess, I'm actually working on a buttstock to one of my rifles. If you can guess what rifle it is, brownie points for you. I'm not going to mention it, but there are a couple of key details on here which should point it out like that. Now, who isn't a stickler for weight? This T4 comes in at about 17.6 ounces, which is fairly average in the LPVO category. Just to give you some sort of idea, the Whiskey 5 comes in 0.8 of an ounce heavier. And, just to throw out a couple of different options, this Hawk Frontier 30, which we'll be reviewing very soon, comes in at almost 20 ounces. I should throw another 1-4 there just for fair comparison. This is Zeiss Conquest V4 videos coming out very soon. It actually comes in a little bit lighter. This Zeiss is really interesting, but we'll touch on that more when that video comes out. One last one just for the hell of it is the Primary Arms Classic 1-4, comes in even lighter, almost a full ounce lighter. So there we have it. The first first focal plane LPVO I've ever gotten my hands on. I didn't know if I would like this or not, and it turns out I love it. But that illumination breaks my heart. Anyway, a huge thank you to Patreon provider Scott for sending this in for review. It's because of my Patrons and the very good viewers out there that offer to send their scopes in for review that allow me to get my hands on stuff like this. So huge thank you to Scott, and a huge thank you to all of you for watching. See you again next time. And a huge thank you to all of my Patreon supporters. Without you, this wouldn't be possible.